Well, it's been a very lengthy 2 days, and I'm not going to add much to the length, not only because of the weather outside, but also because the presentations have been so clear that I'm not sure we need anything that looks like a summary. Let me make 2 or 3 points. The title of this session was the bioenergy, climate change, and health. And we learned several things that I'll just note as we leave here. The first is the huge impact of biofuels on food production. That's really, it seems to me, to be the place to focus on, and I think society will focus on that. It turns out that it takes a lot of biofuel to make a relatively little amount of energy at the moment. And it turns out, which I did not understand fully, that both fossil fuels and biofuels emit greenhouse gas, and that the saving is in large part in the plant uptake, that is the growing of the plants for the biofuels, that produces the greenhouse gas saving. That's a data point that I didn't fully understand. But and the fact that we're going to have more and more biofuels is, I think, set somewhat in stone, at least for some time. And right now, I did not realize, and just to give the sense of the magnitude, that 40% of the corn production in the United States is used for biofuels. That's got to have a huge impact. And by 2050, the assumption is that 20% of all transport fuels will be biofuels. Now, if the greenhouse gas emissions reduction is not huge, is not great, you might think that maybe there would be a reversal of the trend toward more biofuels for transportation fuel. But I think that trend is not going to happen. It's not going to happen by itself, and maybe it shouldn't happen. There are two drivers. One is the urgency of climate change. We don't need to dwell on that. The second one is political. Like everything else in this country, in most countries, once you have an established industry, there is great pressure not to meddle with it and not to reduce it and not to put any handicaps in its way. So there's going to be a biofuel production used for transport fuels, I think, for a long time to come. What the source of that is, we heard all about the alternatives, but we have to recognize that it's there. And as health professionals, I think it's important to focus on the health issues. We heard about some of them, health issues in the course of production of biofuels, real but maybe not earth-shaking. The more important health issues probably do arise from the intensified use of land, the increased use of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers in order to achieve that intensification, the consequences of that intensification, which is the increased runoffs with its consequences on fresh waters, and the water quality that emerges from this intensification. Those are health issues of a rather large magnitude. So you have, when you think about the health consequences of an intensified use of biofuels, you find the water issue I just mentioned, the quality of water. You find in some places the quantity of water, which maybe has not as direct a health consequence, but has a health consequence. You find consequences in food prices, as we learned, probably more serious issue in developing countries than in the United States. But if food prices get more expensive, the tendency to choose foods that are cheap rather than are healthy becomes very real. You then, if you want to go just one step further, you then run the risk of failed states or states that are unable to deliver food at reasonable prices to their citizens, with the consequences that you have an even more destabilized world. Just one quick remembrance on my part. In the year 2000, I headed the U.S. delegation to the World Water Conference. We had prepared, along with some other countries, a very carefully, very modest proposal to begin to study the pricing of water, on the theory that water was being wasted in large quantities because it had no price, unlike food and every other necessity of life. Although we were clear that this was a difficult issue for some countries and it would be viewed nervously, and as a result, we drafted it in the most modest possible fashion, it just about blew up the conference. The very suggestion that we study pricing of water was considered so dangerous to countries where the citizens depended upon that, both for agriculture and for domestic use, that it caused great risk. And in fact, somewhat earlier, the government of Ecuador fell on the basis of a proposal to price water. So the notion that we can deal with food and water issues by reducing, especially water issues, by reducing waste by pricing is itself difficult. Net result of all of this is the essentials of life, food and water, are going to be under increased pressure from the equally intense pressure to address climate change. As health professionals, this group here has a substantial ability and responsibility to contribute thoughtfully to that discussion. Let me add just one more thought. Lester Brown, in his comments, said that the greenhouse gas emission and the greenhouse gas concentration goals that we now have for 2050 really are totally inadequate to meet the threat of and the consequences of climate change, and that we should meet them by 2020. I pointed out in my reaction to that that's, for the United States, that's simply out of the question. We'll be lucky to meet our 2020 goals by 2020. We can do better, but we can't do anything like them. All this just to say that the issue of climate change deserves the priority, the attention, and the intensity of effort that people give it. And what we need to do in the United States, I think, is to broaden the number of Americans who care about that, who are somewhat knowledgeable about it, and who are not either agnostic or hostile to dealing with it. And I think the health professionals can play a big role in that. So that even as we learn today that biofuels may actually not help as much as we thought they might in the fight against climate change, I think the health professionals generally need to be enlisted in that effort in a more active and robust way. And the reason is not only because it's the right thing to do, but the reason is that Americans trust health professionals. Not necessarily professors of public health. I don't know what their views are on those. But they trust doctors, they trust nurses, and they trust health professionals with whom they come into contact. So that our medical schools and our public health schools, it seems to me, are important places where the urgency of dealing with climate change, both in a personal and a political fashion, ought to be addressed, because that community of health professionals in every part of the health community are some of the most influential persons to many Americans who at the moment are outside of that public debate. That last comment is mine. It doesn't really emanate particularly from anything that was said today, but I believe it quite strongly. And with that, I think these proceedings come to a close. We want to thank Christine and Aaron for their excellent work in putting this together and choosing and contacting the presenters and in putting together the program. Lynn Goldman is a wonderful and active participant in every aspect of that. We thank her as well. We thank all of the presenters. The presentations were almost uniformly interesting, uniformly good, uniformly on point. We're very grateful for that. We wish everyone a safe and happy trip home, and these proceedings are closed. Thank you.